Therapy Chat Podcast, episode 216.
This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C.
Today's episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes. Between writing notes, filing insurance claims, and scheduling with clients, it can be hard to stay organized. That's why I recommend Therapy Notes. Their easy-to-use platform lets you manage your practice securely and efficiently. Visit therapynotes.com to get 2 free months of Therapy Notes today. Just use the promo code TherapyChat when you sign up for a free trial at therapynotes.com. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan. Today, I am bringing you an interview that I hope you will find very interesting. I certainly did. It kind of brings together a lot of the different pieces that we've been talking about on Therapy Chat. My guest is Thad Frye. Thad is an LCSW and certified Brainspotting practitioner. He's a clinician and clinical supervisor practicing in Louisville and Broomfield, Colorado. Thad specializes in supporting courageous adults coping with the loss of a loved one, recent life transitions, or past traumatic events to make a better life now. Thad is a proud board member of the Rocky Mountain Brainspotting Institute, the very first Brainspotting Institute created in the country by lead trainer Dr. Thad Frye, that raises awareness of the powerful healing power of brainspotting and raises funds for a scholarship to provide support to clients of limited financial means. Thad enjoys giving talks on the use of brainspotting to support individuals' work with grief and loss, as well as performance enhancement for athletes, musicians, and public speakers. I think you're going to love this conversation as we talked about how Thad uses brainspotting in his work. I found it very, very interesting and really enjoyed it. In fact, I'm hoping to have him come back again sometime in the future. So let's just dive right into my conversation with Thad Frye. Therapy Chat Podcast wouldn't exist without the support of its listeners. If you'd like to become a member, please go to patreon.com/therapychat. By making a $1 per month donation, you can help Therapy Chat keep going over the long haul. Thank you for your support. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and I am so curious about the conversation I'm getting ready to have with my guest, Thad Frye, LCSW. Thad, thanks so much for being my guest today on Therapy Chat.
Laura, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here and really curious to talk to you about your work using Brainspotting and how that ties in with doing grief and loss work. I've been talking with a lot of people about grief and loss lately because of things that are going on in my personal life. I guess it just is coming up, you know?
Yeah.
So let's just, before we even talk about Brainspotting, let's just give you a chance to introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little about who you are and what you do.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I want to start by saying that I am a big fan of yours. I listen to Therapy Chat quite often, and I utilize it when I go on runs or go on walks and share it with people. So again, I'm very pleased to be on this with you. So thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, my name is Thad Frye. I'm an LCSW. I'm I live in Boulder, Colorado, and have my practice is in both Louisville and Broomfield, Colorado. I've really dedicated the great majority of my career to working with people after their loved ones have passed away on hospice. So I went to the University of Texas at Austin for graduate school and worked for a year out there in a hospice working with folks with HIV and fell in love with it. And then moved back actually because of my parents both passed within a very short amount of time. And that's what actually brought me back to Colorado, where I'm from. And so I took a little while to heal from that. I took a little time to lick my wounds, realize that I needed support because I thought, well, my gosh, I'm an empathetic person and I have the school learning now, so I'm sure, just take care of myself. But I learned pretty quickly that going to see somebody for grief counseling was needed and worked out perfectly. Found a gentleman who's also an LCSW, made that connection, and it really, really helped me. And then I jumped right back into hospice and I've worked for 2 different hospices over 16 years locally. And for the great majority of that time, I've worked after their loved ones have passed away, being a grief counselor, working with individuals, couples, families, doing group work. Like I said, it's definitely been my passion. And so did that, like I said, for a long time. And then I've had a smaller private practice for about 5 years. And then I took the leap and I'm in full-time practice. And one of the biggest parts that enabled me is just an individual to feel confident enough in making that leap was actually utilizing Brainspotting, because it helped me help so many people in different directions. Yes, grief and loss, and that's where my heart is, but also with self-esteem, anxiety, depression, even sports performance, and some really cool stuff like that. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, thank you for that background info. And the first thing that comes to mind right away for me is like, wow, it must have been hard. I'm so sorry for the loss of your parents. And
thank you.
It must have been really hard to go back to doing hospice work after their deaths. I mean, I don't know how long it was, but was that challenging for you?
It's a great question. And I mean, there's so much there, right? Like I said, my dad's was sudden. My mom's, they had been divorced for a long time, but lived locally. And then my mom was diagnosed and then actually passed away on the hospice that I later worked for. So, so there was, like I said, I took at least 6 months off, the longest time I've taken off in my career. And like I said, I didn't know if I was going to be moving back to Austin or if I was going to stay in Colorado, and then just really did a lot of self work. And I knew my passion was for grief and loss. I mean, I was working in it before all of that happened. And so the big thing that I really considered was making sure I had good boundaries and that I was getting the self-care and getting the support I needed, because most people are good about this. But every once in a while, you'd hear about a professional in one of those roles and they would talk about all the losses in their life. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing to bond with somebody, but obviously you need to know when that part needs to, when we need we're not connecting. Now I'm taking over the conversation. And so through my work with my counselor at the time and knowing it was my passion, I jumped in, and it took about 3 months to say for sure if this was right. But I noticed I would go home and I didn't take it home with me. I knew that just for whatever reason, I've always been drawn to that side of things.
Oh, that's beautiful that you have been able to do that work for so long, and I'm sure make a difference in many, many people's lives. And I also think that, experience of, when someone you love dies, it really changes you. The first time it happens, it's a unique experience to lose someone. And I think it can really deepen the way that you can connect with people who are going through that same kind of loss.
I couldn't agree with you more. I often say that because I've had all of my losses doesn't mean that all of a sudden I truly understand what it feels like in your body or your brain or your emotions. Of course I don't. You have your unique relationship with your loved one and everything, but I at least have a better window in. And so I think that truly has helped me. As long as, like I said, I do my own self-care, I can come alongside somebody in a different way than maybe somebody who hasn't had those losses. It does give you a deeper appreciation for the way that you walk with somebody during that time, for sure.
Yeah. And I think the other part for me, this is my own experience, but after I lost my grandmother around 2004, before that time, I would have been very avoidant about thinking about losing people I love.
Yes.
And after, it was like, okay, this can happen and it can be okay, you know, and just allowing myself to go somewhere I couldn't have gone before, even though I wasn't a therapist at that time anyway. But I just didn't want to talk about that. I didn't want to think about it. You know, I really wanted to avoid that. Yeah. So it definitely changed the way that I was able to show up with people who were going through grief and loss once I did become a therapist.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But for you, Thad, did you use Brainspotting as a client before you got trained in it?
I actually didn't. So I was at hospice with a friend who is also a grief therapist, and she talked about a very close loss that she had had in her family, and which I knew about. And so I was actually just asking her about, what have you noticed modality-wise that's been impactful for you professionally or personally, and just trying to grow. And she had talked about that loss and that it was, again, a very close loss, and that the only thing that had made it better and made it livable and workable was Brainspotting. And I'll be honest, I'd literally never heard of it when she brought it up. And so I asked her about it, and she told me about it. And although I'm from Boulder, sometimes I still go, really? That's what that was? Because when you hear what Brainspotting is, most people show up and they're ready to do it. But some people have that skeptical look, as they should, or this is what we're doing. I thought this was psychology, and it is. So anyway, she told me about it, and I did very limited research on purpose because I kind of wanted to go in as a blank slate and just notice what I noticed. And that's what I did. I went to a 3-day phase 1 training in Boulder with Dr. Thad Frye. You know, I'll be honest, was a little bit skeptical walking in. And after day 1 of it, wasn't just because we got to learn about some of the neurology, some of the background. We got to watch Pi work with another therapist as a client, and then we broke out in pairs and would be the therapist for about an hour and the client for about an hour. And so I was hooked afterwards because I'd never had an experience like that in therapy. So
yeah, well, I am so intrigued by Brainspotting, and this isn't my first time talking about it here, but I still feel it seems still mysterious to me.
Sure.
So let's just talk about so you mainly do grief and loss in your practice now, right?
I do. I have a lot of grief and loss, but I also work with anxiety and depression and different things like that. So, but like I said, some of the latest stuff I've been doing is trying to work with artists, musicians, and athletes. And Boulder is a world-class area for people who love to be like ultra marathon runners and whatnot. And so working with them towards performance has been great because it's just a different way of working with people. But yeah, so it kind of runs the gamut. But I would say a good third of the people that I work with at this point would be grief and loss. Definitely, like I said, it's where my heart is, and I think will always be a large part, if not the majority, of what I do.
Yeah. So it sounds like Brainspotting really kind of applies to, I don't know, I don't want to say any issue that a client brings, but what can you tell me about it? Yeah.
It really is what I like about it, and what I learned in phase 1 and gets reemphasized in any class that I've ever taken or been a part of, is that if you're going to work with trauma, or you're going to work with, specific anxiety or phobias, that you really should be an expert in that field. Like, if you're niching down to do that, then you shouldn't just rely on purely Brainspotting to get you there, because you want to be able to do the work beforehand. You want to do the work afterwards to help them with grounding. There's stuff you can do with Brainspotting as well, but it's great because they talk about that this is not trying to block out any other modalities. It's to come along and be a companion with other modalities. So often, it's different for everybody, but usually I've only had it once or twice where I've utilized Brainspotting in the first session. I almost always bare minimum wait 2 to 3 sessions just so we can build rapport and safety so that somebody can go in and do that deep neurological work. So that's the kind of the way that I practice. But I've been able to work with a lot of different people going through different things in their lives and feel like I'm doing a good job, because they'll walk out of most sessions, not every session, but feeling a lightness in their body, feeling like they don't need to avoid something, or they can let go of guilt. And again, sometimes we're working on deep historic trauma or things like that. And so, of course, it's going to take a bunch of sessions. I would say certain things can be worked on in one session and be done. But other things, of course, we're going to have to do the work. It's not a fast forward button by any means.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And that's kind of one of I think for me, there's some kind of fear about whether, and I guess this is true with any method or technique, that I feel so protective about working with complex trauma. And it's like, if you don't know what you don't know, if you don't know what you're seeing happening for the person, you might think that they're doing fine, and then they could totally be decompensating a day or two later, and you have no idea why. Yes. Though I'm not saying that would be the case with Brainspotting. I just wonder, how do you deal with that concern when you have, because I think so many people don't come in and say, I have trauma. They might say, I have a fear of public speaking. And then, but it turns out that it relates to some traumatic event or some deep attachment injury that they had.
I think I'm a cautious person by nature. So I think this is a perfect question for me. And of course, other brain spotters might come at it differently, but we have multiple ways of accessing held trauma in the brain and body. And the two different big ones are the activation model and the resource model. So basically, that being said, I usually start with something that is not a 10 out of 10 when it comes to that feeling in their body when they think about such and such trauma. So like you said, maybe they come in for public speaking. So we work with that issue, and I'll resource them a lot as we start the process and during the process. And so we'll find a resource eye position. We'll find a resource body position. We might even, in phase 2, we learn about we wear these goggles that block out one eye or the other eye. So then sometimes people will be thinking about an issue and noticing that feeling of anxiety in their stomach, and they might subjectively say that's an 8 out of 10. And I'll just have them look wherever they want to look. We're not finding necessarily a brain spot, but look wherever they want to in the room, cover one eye for about 10 seconds, and then just notice what they notice. Then cover the other eye for about 10 seconds, notice what they notice. And easily half the time, if not more than that, somebody goes, I feel a little bit better when I was covering my left eye. So then I'll give them the goggles that cover that left eye, and we find a brain spot based on that. But also, instead of going from that feeling of 8 out of 10 in their stomach, I'll ask them to say, is there anywhere that's neutral in your body? I won't use the word safe, because I think safe is a very loaded question, especially, as you know, for people with trauma. So I might say, is there somewhere that feels neutral? And sometimes people can find that. They do a quick body scan, like we might do in mindfulness and meditation, but sometimes they can't. And so I'll say, well, sometimes people will say their kneecaps or the end of their nose or end of their ears. People usually tend to be able to resonate with that. And so instead of using their stomach kind of as their body anchor into being able to access the held trauma in their brain, we use it from a more positive side. So like I said, it might be their legs feel strong because they're runners. And so that they are putting their thoughts and noticing that body sensation from their legs, and we process there. So that's usually where I start, just because I want them to be in the window of tolerance. I don't want to, as you were talking about, make it, 2-3 days later, they are feeling disassociated or going back to maladaptive coping because of something that we did. I definitely want to let them know they can do this work. And as we build rapport and as we, access different things, then people are usually willing to go to that deeper work. And I definitely have had plenty of examples where somebody starts on one thing and then, we've all had this experience, but they'll say, I haven't shared this with anybody. And you feel honored that they're willing to talk about it and then to brainspot around it. And then if they find any relief or sometimes a lot of relief, it's great. It really is great.
Let's just pause for a moment so I can give you a little bit more information about why I love therapy notes. I switched to therapy notes a few years ago. I'd say it's about 3 years now, I believe. And I have never regretted it. I was very happy with the EHR I used before, but therapy notes is more intuitive. I love the interface. The customer service is fantastic. And I love how I can get my notes done quickly because I can customize the template that I use for my notes. And there are opportunities to put check marks rather than having to write out the intervention used. So I have cut my time spent writing notes way down, which is wonderful because I like to focus on seeing clients. I know documentation is an important part of our work, but it can also be time consuming. And that is why I love using therapy notes. If you are considering switching EHRs or you're looking for one to use in your practice, give therapy notes a try. You can get 2 free months by using the code TherapyChat. Now let's get back to our interview. So let me ask you a quick question to clarify. So when you were saying the neutral spot and then the strong legs, is the strong legs a neutral spot or is that a resource spot?
It's and I should say basically a resource spot is neutral. So they're one and the same. Yep. So activation spot would have been that feeling in their stomach where they felt like maybe I could even throw up, right? So that would be, if we were trying to really go at it, then that would be our activation spot. So we'd be kind of having them anchor themselves in that, noticing whatever they notice and go where that goes. Instead, they're obviously holding that because they it's their stomach and they notice it. But I also have them go to a neutral area in their body so that when they're thinking about that, going up there and doing public speaking, and I get wobbly in the legs sometimes, but right now they feel strong or they feel neutral. And that's more of working from that angle rather than activation.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, of course.
So is it possible in your example with the public speaking, and then they say later, I've never told anyone this.
Yeah.
Is it possible that what they were able to access when they got the fear of public speaking kind of to have less charge, it's like it opened something up to allow them to access it?
For sure. I mean, I think, like you said, I think it can come in, probably a lot of different directions, but 2 of them would be that they feel more comfortable with you. They feel comfortable with the situation, so they're willing to share it. But the other part is that with doing this work, I mean, we're working with the limbic part of our brain, so the amygdala, the hippocampus. And so you have all these memories that have been stored that we're not accessing. And so people will sometimes have these memories of being 5 years old and being scolded for talking, or remembering what it was like to forget their lines when they were the wizard in the Wizard of Oz or whatnot. And I've had those direct experiences where they have a concrete memory and then they notice how that made them feel. And so then when they were able to move that through, and people have a lot of somatic cues, so they might feel stuff in their body quite often while they're doing this. Then they feel like, okay, I was able to do that, and maybe now I can do that public speaking, and the anxiety is not as big. So then they're more willing to say, I'm willing to access this. And then there's also, when they're doing something related to public speaking, sometimes they are in tune with either memories or body sensations that remind them or jogs memories or brings up for them that, yeah, there was an abuse history or neglect history. And so they're willing to look at it differently. And again, all it needs to be in the framework of having a safe place to be able to do the work. But yes, I've definitely had that too.
Well, you just made me think of something that really is relevant to my clients. Probably about half of my clients, if not more, have very little memory of childhood. So they have like blocked off places,
Yes.
Things that they just can't get to. So is someone who, I would say this is like, for half of my clients, this is common. I don't really remember my childhood. So it's not just like I don't remember certain years or anything.
Yep.
It's just like, I don't really have any memories.
Yep.
Would that be an indication that someone is a good candidate for brain spotting or not? Or is it just neutral?
Yeah, definitely. If you could see me, I'd be shaking my head in affirmation for sure. So that idea that if somebody, we know that the hippocampus can actually be smaller in people that especially went through early developmental trauma. So that makes sense that they wouldn't have those memories about what was going on. And so it's not just purely, some way to protect ourselves saying, I'm not going to remember that. I'm not going to go back to that. Sometimes it's a physical response. So yeah, if I have people that have that, as we talked about in early attachment stuff, so the first 3 years of your life, you might never have a concrete memory. We'll do this work and it might be purely somatic. And so I don't as a therapist, and I've been a client in doing brain spotting, I don't care if I don't have an associated memory or whatnot. If I notice that all of a sudden my arms, this happens all the time, that somebody's arms or legs will feel numb for a while, or they'll feel like they're on fire, or they'll feel like they have a weighted blanket on and things feel good. So I know that it's processing through their body and releasing. And so oftentimes people can, like I said, if they start at a 10 out of 10 on some, memory or basic feeling around something, and we end at a 3, well, that's a huge, huge deal. So for sure that happens. So that person would be a great candidate if they said they were blocking. The other thing I should say is I've definitely had plenty of clients, understandably, saying it feels like there's a wall there. I don't know if I want to go through that wall. And so kind of going into that memory, and this might be 30 minutes into processing. And some people are very quiet, don't talk at all during their processing. Others talk the whole time like it's a normal therapy session. So, but when they come back, so when they come back and they'll say things like, I don't know if I can do that. The nice part about brain spotting too is I'm not directing them. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm there in attunement with them. I'm allowing space for them. I'm there to affirm, but I'm never saying, yep, go towards the wall or don't, or I'm letting them do whatever makes sense for them. And I've had it where some people, I'm thinking of 2 examples where one person in that session allowed themselves to see what was behind that. And then I've had other people where we go back and stop there and do another and resource them, but then do a whole nother session around that if they want to. So that's the beauty, is that we follow the client. It is not a therapist led, besides setting up the frame, getting it working, and then allowing them to do whatever they need to do.
Okay. And maybe being able to see what's happening and help resource if needed.
You got it. And there's different ways to resource people if you feel like they're kind of getting outside the window of tolerance. Like I said, if I usually break it down in thirds. About a third of the people that I work with might not talk the entire time. About a third will not talk much, but they might say that feeling in my stomach has moved to my chest or to my back. It feels positive. It feels horrible. It feels like, and then they'll go right back into kind of processing and being quiet and just looking at the brain spot. And then about a third, like I said, we'll talk almost the whole time. They'll be looking at the brain spot, but they'll be chatting with me about it and saying, that's strange. I feel like I know this is where I started, but I can smell the cookies. I'm at my grandmother's house in this memory. And then other people will have very faint memories around stuff. So The people that are totally silent, I check in with them from time to time and say, what do you notice in your body right now? And that's very purposeful for a couple of reasons. And I tell people that I will do this, so it's not something out of the blue, is I'm not trying to knock them back into their prefrontal cortex and have to think about it. So I wouldn't say, if they might have said something like, I feel guilty because I wasn't there when my mom died. I'm not going to go into CBT and say, well, what would you say to a friend that would say that to you? You've been such a wonderful child, because then they have to think about it. They have to bring themselves out of it. With this, I'm just saying, check in with me. I'm here. And what are you noticing in your body right now? And I get a lot from that, because sometimes I might think, my gosh, I haven't heard from them in a while. And they started an 8 out of 10 in their chest. And I had this actually this morning where somebody talked about, now I just feel calm. I feel good. And so then I let them process and continue on from there. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do this.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So here is my ultimate question. This is where I get stuck. I probably need to brain spot this. When someone says, I feel calm, I'm so curious, because of working with people who have trauma, who oftentimes haven't really felt what it feels like to feel regulated.
Sure. Yes.
And then you might know where I'm going, but it's like, how can you and they tell if it's calm or like shut down, like hypo aroused?
Right. Or dysregulated or yep. That's a good question.
Calm, I mean, or no?
Right. Exactly. And the short answer is not necessarily. I don't always know. Right. And that's why I'm a big fan of getting to know the client for a number of sessions, getting a good background history, and so that I know who I'm in the room with, they know who they're in the room with. And again, sometimes they haven't shared these trauma histories, or they, didn't even fully recognize some of them.
They may not know, especially for someone who doesn't have memory.
Exactly. So I would say in those kind of situations that I would do my best, obviously, to leave enough time at the end of a session. And I always try to do that we wrap up that portion, that processing portion, and then have time to do grounding, do mindfulness, talk about what they're going to do in the week between it. I often, especially on a first session with somebody in Brainspotting, I will say, if you need to give me a call, either the next day or an email, feel free to. Let's reach out. Let's touch base. And about 2 or 3 people will do that. And I mean it when I offer that, because this is such a different experience than talk therapy can be. And so I just want to allow that space. But as you said, I think that would come with having them come in the next time, talk about what showed up. I would say even that right after we got done processing, what did they notice? What is that feeling in their body? What were they thinking about, or where were their memories going? Because that could be a telltale sign. Obviously, if they're thinking about some trauma history that showed up around their parents, and then they're feeling calm, well, that's a different story, right? Than them being with some other memory that's allowing them to feel a weight off of their chest, where they feel like they can breathe. And so listening to descriptors in different ways. If they feel, like you said, I talked to them about numbness. That feels different to me than feeling like, oh my gosh, I've been 10 years since I felt like I could take a full breath. So just looking to the intricacies of their language, like we would do in anything. So yeah, it's a great question though. And that's why I'll go back to that idea that if you utilize this with this modality with people, then you should have your background in different people that you're working with and different things that you want to do. So I would never, again, say you can't just use this as a standalone. You need to be a trauma-informed therapist, which is great because there's a lot of us out there nowadays.
Yeah. And I mean, on my soapbox for a second, that I feel like we all need to know how to recognize trauma and really understand, even if we don't, quote unquote, want to work with trauma, we have to know that majority of people who come through our doors have experienced some kind of trauma or attachment injury. And if we try to ignore that, we're just, kind of doing a disservice to
totally. We could be doing harm. So I'll join you on the soapbox and say one of the best things or things that I love doing is building community in the private practice world. And if you would have talked to me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said that in the sense of that I'm no wallflower, but I'm definitely not an extrovert. And so I've known that, I'm really good at working with people going through these issues, but I want to know people that are great at working with children, right? And that's not something that I do. And then getting more specific and more specific. And so building that network, which is great because I get to meet a lot of great people. But I also
you
can
don't have
say
to be good at everything.
Exactly. And I know I'm referring to them to somebody who's trained up in that. And that's great. It's reciprocal and you're getting the client to the right person. So that definitely happens where I'll work with somebody and we might hit an area and I'll say, I have 3 people that might be wonderful to work with. And I have that too, where I have some therapists in the local community that know brain spotting personally, or have thought about getting trained in it, but haven't yet. And so they might be working with somebody around grief and loss and a lot around suicide, loss of a loved one through completion of suicide. And so I've had it a handful of times where somebody will send them to me and we'll meet for 5 to 8 sessions. And then they'll go back to working with that other person that they have that ongoing rapport with. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, I've heard more and more how brain spotting can be a great adjunct to, the therapy you're already doing with your ongoing therapist who you've been working with for a long time. But maybe there's just one thing you just haven't been able to get to or move through yet, and you're thinking you need another way. So I love it.
I'm going to add to that too, is I love what you said because, we get to work with that unconscious mind and we get to allow somebody the safety and space to go in and do that deep work that I can't do with language alone. And so that's what makes this one unique. But I mean, you have obviously EMDR, somatic experiencing, Haikomi. There's so many good things out there. And of course, brain spotting is my passion, but I love that we are learning so much more about the brain and doing different modalities that help us access that for people and do this deep healing for sure.
Yeah, I love it too. And I'm so grateful that you were able to take the time to talk with us today, Thad.
Yeah, this was awesome, Laura. I'm my 8th grade version of myself say I'm psyched to be here. So I really appreciate it.
Love it. So yes. Thad, I know you're involved. You have you're part of a group practice, but you also are involved with some other things with brain spotting. So what do you want to tell people who are listening about where to find you, what else you do, and all that stuff?
That would be great. So to find me, you can find me and more information on brain spotting and the work that I do at Thad Frye counseling.com. So again, THADFRYE, counseling.com. And then I am proud board member of a local nonprofit here in town. It's called RMBI. It's Rocky Mountain Brain Spotting Institute. It was started by, again, Dr. Pi Frye. She's wonderful. She's the lead trainer outside of David Grand's the one who came up with brain spotting, but she's been a lead trainer and she's truly one of the warmest, funniest people you'd know. And she started it a long time ago, and there's been a lot of local people that have joined the board throughout the years. But the basic gist of what we do is to try to build community among brain spotters, to get the word out and tell people about it. But the other part that's probably the most important is that we try to do fundraising throughout the year to be able to get money for scholarships for people that who've had trauma in their lives, to get them 10 sessions for working with a certified brain spotting practitioner locally. And so it's usually folks that aren't appropriate to be on Medicaid, but maybe make too much money, but don't make enough to have insurance. So we want to help help that a little bit. And that's been the passion of PI and the rest of the board, is to raise awareness and raise funds to help people out. So thanks for asking. That's big.
Yeah. And so if anybody who's listening is in, I guess, is it in Boulder or is it in Colorado?
Yep.
Wants to access that, where would they go?
Exactly. They would go to Rocky Mountain Brainspotting Institute.org. You can just put in RMBI and you'll find it out of Google. But yeah, Rocky Mountain Brainspotting.org, and that would be awesome. And we also have a directory there as well. That's one of the ways that we raise funds, are that we have a lot of local and sometimes out of state brainspotting clinicians that you can look up and know that if you want a brain spotting practitioner, you're going to find one there at our directory. So that's another. And we also have articles, also have research. We have some podcast episodes, and I think we're going to add one more after this. There you go. So we're trying to be one of the central hubs. Now there's a handful of different institutions throughout the country, but PI was the one who started this one, and it was the original one. And we've been lucky enough to have it be growing a lot, especially in the last couple of years. Brainspotting has really kind of exploded, which I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing training in it myself that I have not registered for, but I do intend to do.
That'd be great.
I think you really sold me now that you answered my burning deep question about it. So thank you, Thad.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to my interview with Thad Frye. I just really loved how he talked about his work. I think that he's a very interesting person to talk with, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'd love to hear what you think. If you have any feedback about this episode or about this podcast in general, feel free to get in touch with me using the link on therapychatpodcast.com. You can go to where it says leave a message with SpeakPipe and click on that, and I get to receive a message from you with your own voice, which I just love. I love hearing those. Sometimes I respond back in my own voice when I can. So until next time, thanks so much as always for listening to Therapy Chat. We would not be here without all of you and your support. Take care. Today's episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes. There are many ways to keep your practice organized, but Therapy Notes is the best. Their easy-to-use, secure platform lets you not only do your billing, scheduling, and progress notes, but also create a client portal to share documents and request signatures. Plus, they offer amazing unlimited phone support, so when you have a question, you can get help fast. To get started with the practice management software trusted by over 60,000 professionals, go to therapynotes.com and start a free trial today. If you enter promo code TherapyChat, they will give you 2 months to try it out for free. Just another reminder that if you'd like to become a member of Therapy Chat, supporting the podcast while receiving fun member perks and being able to communicate with me one-on-one, go to patreon.com/therapychat. If every subscriber donated just $1 per month, Therapy Chat would be able to keep going strong indefinitely. Thanks so much for your support.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSW-C. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.